Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon clear. A Necromancer has done it. But which build is he running? The dude is called Necabon. Channel link in the description below. I'll break down skills, aspects, items, and the Paragon board. Skill breakdown. This is a Shadowblight build and it's not using minions. Heads up. We begin with Reap with our essence production, and that goes with Reap for bonus corpses. That has another reason to reduce damage. We'll come to that later. Then 3 points in Hued Flesh for bonus corpse generation, maximum points in Blood Mist, plus Blood Mist makes corpses, and also maximum points in Corpse Explosion with Shadow Corpse Explosion. Only 1 point in Grim Harvest because technically you have the Reap to produce some essence in between, but you should always be maxed out on essence in general due to the way how we're going to be utilizing Blood Mist. Then also Fueled by Death for the bonus damage increase. That gets followed by Death Embrace, and that is the damage reduction from enemies close to you and bonus damage. And this is so important because one thing that's mentioned many times by him is that 50 or 80 Nightmare Dungeons upwards, you're going to struggle with survivability. So you're going to do everything for survivability because damage you do anyways, but you need to maximize to stay alive to even do that damage. That gets followed up by bonus amplified damage to cursed enemies, and then lucky hit chance reduce the cooldown of your abilities with Decrepify. Also, Decrepify slows and gives you damage reduction on your opponents on top of that. So stacking damage reduction to make sure you survive, and crowd control effect for bonus damage. Then 2 points in Corpse Tendrils, and then also Plague Corpse Tendrils that you make your enemies vulnerable. That's another crowd control effect with stun and then with vulnerable. He's playing this over the Golem, and I would assume that the Golem in higher Nightmare Dungeons, if you're not going for a Golem board, will die rather fast. I like the Golem right now in 80 plus with my Shadow build, but if I'm later going for level 100 and then tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, it might make sense to go for the Corpse Tendrils instead. But there's also another reason for this we'll come to. Plus Reaper's Pursuit with 3 points, Gloom for the bonus stacking shadow damage, and then Terror for more damage against stunned, immobilized, and slowed enemies. And yes, you can stun and slow enemies with your skills so far. Only 1 point in Necrotic Carapace, which I personally don't like, but with the amount of corpses you actually trigger, you should be fortified end of the day anyway, so 2 or 6% shouldn't make that much of a difference. Then you want to go for Standalone with a bonus 3 points for the optimal damage reduction, plus Memento Mori for the 60% increase on your sacrifices, Bone Storm with the bonus critical strike chance, and last but not least, Shadowblight. Now with the aspects, he's going to make himself survive even more. That is in the offhand. First and foremost, you have the Shadowblight Keep passive stacking 5 times for 40% each to have a huge damage increase, with a blighted aspect as well for the 10 times stack on the 120% damage on the main hand. Very important, if you do actually have the Black River one-hand unique scythe, Corpse Explosion consumes up to 4 additional corpses around the initial corpse, dealing X damage increased damage and with X larger radius. Choose that one over the blighted aspect, and then put the blighted aspect on your offhand instead of the aspect of decay. That being said, make sure that your offhand has the intrinsic affix of cooldown reduction and that your one-handed weapon is a wand, so you would actually get a bonus of lucky hit that helps you to trigger Decrepify. For the One Ring, you want your Blood Mist to leave behind a pool of shadows, so you actually have your escalating shadow damage escalate even more as you do the pool of shadows, as you trigger the Shadow Blights, and you also do leave behind exploding corpses with on your helmet the aspect of Explosive Mist, to not only leave behind exploding corpses, to also reduce the cooldown of Blood Mist itself that gets reduced by Decrepify further, because if you're in Blood Mist and exploding corpses, you can't be damaged. So the higher damage of tier 100 Nightmare doesn't matter because you're invulnerable. So decrease the cooldown as much as possible to permanently stay into the Explosive Mist. Interesting enough is your Bone Barrier can run while you're in the Explosive Mist, or as soon as you come out of the mist, you can trigger Bone Barrier for bonus survival. The good thing is that Bone Storm can be turned into a shadow skill that's on your second ring. Plus, for the maximum survivability, you have the aspect of Disobedience on your amulet. The aspect of Disobedience gives you an increasing armor stack for 4 seconds that is permanently up and also maxed up to 75% on the amulet as you go in with the aspect of Explosive Mist, because that's going to instant stack it. That gives you so much survivability, it's needed. Especially if you drink an elixir that also gives you bonus armor, this is even more efficient. For the boots, you're taking the Ghostwalker aspect, and I never thought about using this, but it's going to turn you into a speed demon while unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after, you gain 25% increased movement speed. Now, if you use Blood Mist, you are actually unstoppable. Yes, no one can pull you out of that. So you get increased movement speed with your Reaper's Pursuit, plus unstoppable, plus the general movement speed increased on your boots because you don't get any movement speed decrease anymore. You're just flying over the battlefield as you're using that Blood Mist faster than any other class. Finally, for the pants, one of the most important ones is the aspect of the Shielding Storm to get the bonus barrier on your base life for 5%, and that needs to be a max roll. In his video, he's having a 16,000 life, so that's going to give you quite some armor. Followed up by the gloves with the Howl from below for lucky hit chance on the Decrepify and the bonus damage on Corpse Explosion X 40% multiplicative. Yes, the Howl from below is absolutely amazing. I'm not going to say if you don't have this, because realistically, we're talking about a level 100 build. You should probably have one at that point. Followed up with the aspect of Might, and that one surprised me so much. Basic skill grant 20% damage reduction. The interesting thing is this triggers as soon as you use a basic skill. So even if you would use a basic skill to just hit empty air in front of you, not clicking on a minion, just hit empty air in front of you, you would still get the damage reduction for 6 seconds. So before hitting a pack, you can actually curse them for 20% damage reduction, hit the air for the 20% damage reduction, and then wait into them. Intriguing, because I have not thought about actually using my main skills for very much, and I've been using Blight instead. Quite something you could think about. And then last but not least, we talked about it. Blood Mist triggers Corpse Explosion. For the Book of the Dead, you deal 10% increased shadow damage, but you're also going to deal 50% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Yes. But last but not least, you deal 30% increased critical strike damage. And keep in mind that the Bone Storm is actually giving you 20% critical strike bonus. Plus, you could swap technically the Bone Storm is Shadow to the aspect of the Grasping Veins, which gives you bonus critical strike chance again and bonus critical strike damage on top of that. The aspect of the Grasping Veins could go on the gloves if you do not have the Howl from below. That would just generally increase your damage also by a lot. Now for the Paragon board, and this one is actually quite simple. It's only 4 boards and pretty straightforward, simple to what I've been taking. You have the 10% damage max life and also max life and resistance to all elements. You're using the Exploit rare glyph, which is interesting. For every 5 dexterity purchased, you do more damage to vulnerable targets. Okay. But dealing damage to vulnerable enemies increases your overall damage as well as the bonus up to 10%. So if you do 1 Corpse Tendril and 1 Blood Mist, you already have a 10% damage increase to all your damage. Then both notes again here, damage and armor. Fold up into the Wither board. Yes, it's the Wither board all the way up here for escalating shadow damage, which gets followed up by straight up 10% shadow damage down here. Yes, it's flipped twice, so the Wither is up. And this one is going to be, for every 5 willpower purchased, you get increasing shadow damage. And then you and your minions deal 10% increased damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies. So that's another 10% flat damage increase. And you don't actually take the shadow resistance here. You straight up go up for shadow damage over time, shadow damage, followed up by damage reduction by enemies affected by shadow damage. And then you're also after Wither. And then here you take the Gnawing Darkness for 10% damage to shadow dot enemies, so that are shadow damaged, and damage to elites, plus another 10% damage as the bonus. Flying over to the Flesh Eater board, and here you definitely want to take Flesh Eater first. So you get 40% increased damage, multiplicative to all your damage after consuming 5 corpses, which happens more or less instant. Then you're following up with the 100 armor and 12% poison resistance. You're going to have the control glyph. For every 5 intelligence purchased, you get increased damage to crowd control targets. And that gets up to plus 20% bonus damage on stunned enemies. So you slow them anyway with Decrepify. You stun them with Grasping Veins, Corpse Tendrils, and you have a increased damage in general to crowd control target. You take here damage to elites, you take here resistance to all elements, and that gets followed up by 25% damage to injured enemies and critical strike damage. That's where the aspect of Grasping Veins comes in nicely. Fast forward, travel down to the Send of Death board. And that's really interesting because you always have 2 corpses nearby, so you essentially get a 15% damage reduction. That's it. Straight up, flat, 15% damage reduction, no dilly-dally, no hissle-hassle. And then you follow up with more critical strike damage, yes, more life, and then down here, damage to healthy enemies, cool, that's 80% and above, and then more critical strike damage in general, followed up by Deathbringer with damage to injured enemies. So you deal more damage to healthy and more damage to injured, so you do more damage in general to everyone. The last glyph you're using is the Darkness glyph. For For every 5 willpower purchased within range, you deal increased shadow damage, and then you also get a damage reduction again up to 10% for enemies affected by shadow damage, followed up by more damage to druid enemies at intelligence and another 100 armor plus, filling that then up with obviously willpower here to boost the glyph the maximum. Now, will I copy this build 1-to-1? No, 100% not. But there's interesting learnings for this that I'll introduce to my blind Shadowblight Necromancer to make him even more efficient as I'm pushing for 100 with it. That being said, if you're more interested in a summoner with actually minions or a Blood Surge burst build that's already just blasting through Nightmare Dungeons, there is the 2 videos. Enjoy.